All right, welcome everyone. Nice to see you all. So I wanted to start us off this morning exploring how ultimately indescribable this is. This being this, what's here, whatever it is. Of course, we have lots of names for it. We have lots of names for different aspects of what's being encountered, what's appearing, many names, many words, many concepts to try to convey what's present, what's occurring. And much of this happens, shall we say, spontaneously, happening right now in a sense. There's this kind of seemingly ongoing process of rendering, this ongoing process of taking what is ultimately infinite and creating seemingly finite boxes and structures to convey what it is. I was just looking up the definition. That's funny. The definition of define. To state or describe exactly the nature, scope, or meaning of. To mark out the boundary or limits of. So yes, our defining, it's really the defining of consciousness, of the intelligence of the universe is doing the defining, doing all of this, we could say. Yeah, it's taking something that has no limits. Infinity has no limits. And the defining is sort of to something arises, something appears experientially, and then consciousness puts this sort of circle of definition around it. What are the boundary lines of it? What is it, right? That's the definition. And yeah, it's really extraordinary and ultimately liberating to discover how impossible it actually is to limit this. Even though it seems like we can pull it off, it seems like we can collapse this into something that is limited and definable and categorizable. But through exploration of our experience, or maybe it just happens upon us, where reality reveals its indefinable nature. In a sense, it's doing that all the time. It's doing that right now. It's revealing that right now in this very instant. But it might be overlooked. We might be so oriented just out of habit to the seeming reality of the descriptions and definitions that we miss the unlimited, indefinable, infinite, boundless nature of this. And we could say because of that, it can be useful to, quite useful to look again, to explore what's here experientially and discover the ways in which it's uncollapsible. I posted something the other day that I'll write these little sort of brief reminders or pointers or whatever you want to call them. It kind of sums up what I'm talking about and the implications of it. If I can find it here. What frees us from the seeming prison of thinking is the discovery that reality is ultimately unthinkable. So nowhere did I say to get rid of thinking, as if we ever really could. That's not necessary. But we can discover that reality is not thinkable. It's not, you're not able to collapse it into thought. I wanted to just read a little portion from my last book that kind of speaks to why, from a human standpoint, this is what I'm talking about is relevant, very relevant. To be stuck in an experience or circumstance, we first have to know what it is. Just think about that for a moment. To be stuck in an experience or circumstance, seemingly stuck, we first have to know what it is. And what I'm saying is that the states we imagine ourselves caught in, fear, anxiety, insecurity, confusion, transcend any and all definitions we might bring to them. As we come to taste more directly the multidimensional, non-conceptual nature of every state, I mean, from this vantage, there really are no states. You could say that the non-conceptual nature of every instant. We discover that the experiences we thought were solid, fixed things are actually open-ended and indefinite. We find freedom from the experiences that trouble us by seeing that they're not actually the bounded, discrete things we imagine them to be. In short, we clarify their nature. We see that we can never get to the bottom of what experiences are. That's the key. It seems like we can, hence our definitions and then belief in the definitions. Like, oh yeah, I know what this is. But we actually don't. We can't get to the bottom of it. And again, that can be discovered by looking and seeing right now, always right now. There's no other time to see. That no matter what you might be calling this moment and describing it in the ways that consciousness is describing it, it's always more than the description. It's always vaster. There's always more information there than the descriptions could possibly capture and encompass. And then you look at that more and you find more. And you look at that more and you find more. And you explore your experience and you discover something remarkable. And again, just typically overlooked, that you never get to the end of it. You just look and look and look and look and look and feel and feel and feel. You never come to a point like, I've come to the end of what it is. I've come to the final conclusion of what's here. The more we awaken to the indescribability of everything, the more we begin to taste the inherent freedom and open-endedness of every experience. So we often think of, we've been introduced to different spiritual teachings, and I'm sure many of you have been steeped in different teachings, and probably the word freedom, liberation has come up in many of those traditions, I imagine. And I think we typically imagine, well, we're looking for freedom because the sense is that it's somehow absent, that we're in some sort of lack of freedom, some sense of some degree of bondage or contraction, or right, and identification. And freedom is the discovery that there is no bondage. That the bond, what we describe as a moment of bondage, a moment of contraction, a moment of identification, again, we're putting consciousness, the mind, whatever you want to call, there's no words for it, that mechanism of capturing or attempting to capture what's here in a concept, in a word, in a label, can create the sense of that, can create the sense of it being the case, of it being true. Yeah, it feels tight, or it feels, we'll say this, right? It feels contracted, it feels. But it's really interesting because if you actually go to what's present that may be labeled as tight, constricted, bound, identified, and so on, you go to what that label is referring to, and you will find open-endedness. Always. There isn't anything else that can ever be found but open-endedness, actually. It's a bit like living in two worlds that aren't really two worlds. The described world, which we're all very familiar with. I'm a human living in a body in a world. To put a little, general spin on the described world, right? There's that world that we seem to live in, and other people seem to live in. And then there's the actual presence of whatever it is that description is attempting to describe, whatever that is. So if you take something like the body, I mean, just taken for granted that there is a body, that's a description of something that's here, we could say, that's showing up in experience, that then is labeled as body. But if you feel the presence of that, again, you find boundlessness. You feel that now. Feel what you call the body. Feel whatever it is that label is referring to. Feel what's actually present, which is not a concept. Something's here, concretely here. It's a very curious thing about this inquiry, which is go to what is most concretely present, like palpably here, actually here, as here, concretely, like, yes, something's here. It's palpable, undeniable, the presence of somethingness, right? Go to that concreteness, and that's where you find the unfindable. Because it's only in the abstractions that you can apparently find something and pin it down. But when you go to what's actually here, I mean, this is very paradoxical, isn't it? When you go to what's actually concretely here, you discover, you look and you look and you look and you look and you look. And it's the receding horizon of what it is. Just, you never can quite reach it because it's infinite and bottomless. And that's pure freedom. So there's always this opportunity, if we're inclined to explore stuff in this way, that whenever something seems to be a certain way, and it seems convincingly to be a certain way based on our description, like, what are you talking about? I feel fill in the blank, right? And this feels like it's actually here as a describable moment. Again, like it seems like I've succeeded. I've pulled it off. I've put a frame. I've put a box. I've put a limit around what's here. And if you think that's the case, if you imagine that's the case, then just look and see if you can find the limit of this moment. I wrote something else a couple days ago that I don't know, says this as clearly as I can, I think. In the feeling of this moment, don't confuse feeling with emotion, because emotions are very conceptual. Strange as that might sound. I mean, anxiety is a concept. The feeling of what's there, that's what I'm talking about. That the word anxiety or any other label is apparently referring to. In the feeling of this moment, there is no story. There is no bondage. There is no liberation. There is no world and no person struggling with that world. There is just this inconceivable, unimaginably beautiful dance of sparkling radiance. Of course, those words also don't ultimately capture it. At a certain point, one is left with poetry, right? To try to convey the unconveyable. But the sense of, I just feel what's here. Of course, that's what you're doing all the time. And there's no need to try to push away the descriptions of what's here. They can just be here. They're kind of like hanging over what's here, like a canopy, the canopy of descriptions. And meanwhile, what is it that's here? Feel what's here. That has no label. The moment doesn't come with a name tag on it, does it? That's amazing. Like there's no label on this moment. No label whatsoever. And there's, I don't know if you can sense this, but in the feeling of this moment, it has no description, has no knowledge. There's the deepest rest, the deepest ease. Because there aren't things, there aren't, it's not really, doesn't feel correct to say there's nothing there, because in a sense there's everything there, but the everything that's there, the fullness that's there, can't be pinned down. So in that sense, there's nothing. But there's no description there. There's no trying to figure out what's there. There's no wondering about what's there. There's no there's just the nakedness of what's there, which of course explodes forth as all the descriptions and all the narratives. That's the funny thing, you know. It's like, I remember, I think it was the first book I wrote, I dedicated it to the mystery that cannot be spoken, but is the source of every utterance. So it's producing, like the unknown is producing all of this stuff we call knowledge and narrative. And so all of the narratives are beautiful, but they're at best approximations of infinity, right?